This video is going to look at making an interior scene within Maya 2017. Now we've got a blank scene here. You can't start working with a blank scene, you have to have some inspiration. Now I want to make an interior room, but I could spend all day trawling through different versions of interior rooms. So what I've done is I'm going to set myself the challenge of picking one of the first on this page here, and so the first 10. Otherwise I could, like I say, spend all day. Now that one's just a bit too simple, a flat wall, but I could imagine what's in the other side of it, and it may be that I took that as inspiration as part of a wall and added it into another scene. I'm quite a fan of colour in rooms, so you get a lot of kind of black and white monochrome look, or just white, paint it white, philosophies in house building, but this one here kind of has what I need. It doesn't have a window, but I might add one in on the side, so I'm going to pick that one out and look at it. The good thing is it's got a Creative Commons license, and it is an academic work that I'm doing, but if I did want to make it commercial, it's useful to have that already. So looking at the picture, I can zoom in, I can see the books. The books is something I'll do an example of. I'll probably make one or two books and then duplicate them, maybe changing the spines. This is fairly geometric, this light. This is probably the tricky items. So the tricky items are this truck, this sculpted item, this Japanese sword and fish, to some extent the glasses. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to not going to make these sculptures, is really looking at the room, making the room. And I will have a go at making a plant, but I don't think it's going to look exactly like that, because it is very complicated, and the geometry in there would be very complicated. But the floor is straightforward. The walls should be straightforward. It has a nice skirting board, and at the top we've got coving to make as well. I can see where these light sources are, and so I'm going to build this up and try and make some of these items and just show you how I would start working with this. I can see that kind of round plug, so it's probably a US type plug, or you can see where that origins from. So I'm going to save it to a file that I'm working on, and I'm just going to save this in source images. Save that one in there, but I'm also going to go back to this original page here, and I am going to print a PDF. So I'm going to save that print and save that as a PDF. This way I have the original image on the web page and the Creative Commons license that is attached to it. This way I can look at this in 5 years time and I say, oh, did I make that? Where did I make that? Where did I get that image from? And I can reference it on any submission that I may do. This is really useful to look at. So before I start, I will probably also look up a profile for this coving. That's going to be quite useful to do, just to get a good idea of how I can draw that out to a guide rather than make that myself. So once I've found a guide that I might use, like I say, it is going to be a guide. It's not going to be something that I'm going to keep in my work. I can save that also as an image and use that later. One thing that I find really useful is understanding the size of the images. So I need to get this into Maya in a correct ratio, so I can start working with that. And that's a very easy to remember ratio there, 1920 by 1080. So what I can do in Maya is, I've already started there, but I'll go through the process again. I would create a plane, a polygon plane. So create polygon primitive plane, and I would add into that the dimensions that I'm going to use. So I may divide it by 10, or I may keep it very large and work with that. So I do bear in mind that these grids here are based in centimeters, so it is worth going a bit larger than the grid where you can, and So I'm bringing that in. I'm going to rotate that around, I'm guessing now, but I'm going to rotate that around the x-axis because I've looked, I'm not actually guessing, I can see here that the x is pointing this way, so I want to rotate it around that 90 degrees to make that upright. And then I'm going to assign a new material, and I want that to be a Lambert, and then I will connect that to the file in my source images folder. So once I've done that, create render node, add that in, and link this to the file that I want to work with. Now to make that show up, I need to turn textures on for the scene, and that will start working for me in this way. So I can see it's only on one side, which is fine. And I'm going to bring the 4-up view here, and I'm going to press Shift A on the keyboard just to be able to place that in my scene away from that area there. So like I say, this if I press spacebar, it should zoom that up, and it's not quite filling that piece, so it's not actually being the guide that I want it to be. So I'm going to shrink this down in this scene. Now I quite often use the UV editor to make sure that that shrinks to size, and I can just see in there that I can see that that is my plane, and I can see that that's wrapping over the top and stretching out. So however much I made that the right shape, is not matching there. So I may just take this move tool. If I take the scale tool, I should be able to scale that to make that all fit in, and then if I take the W, press W key to get the move, and then scale that again, I should just be able to scale that up to the size of the UVs we need. So like I said, the other way of doing it, and I quite often do it, but I think this is a better way out of principle, is to change the repeat UV. So I could have changed that to 2 in the horizontal, and that probably would have done the same thing. But this is more universal. This method I've just done here, more universal, and will show up better across different systems. Okay, so that's working for me. I've got the whole picture in there. That gives me the guide that I can work with. But I don't want to move it, so what I'm going to do is go to the channel box. If you haven't got it open, you can get it from this icon here. And with that selected, I'm going to add that to a layer. I'm going to create a layer from selected, and I'm going to put that down as a reference. So now I can't click on it, which is great. It's just going to be there, so I can see it in the background as well. If I want to, I can turn that back on, and I can make that slightly transparent. If I went into the attribute editor, you can get that from here. Go to the attribute editor, I can make that slightly transparent, which might be worth doing. But generally you can work with that as you need it. So I'll leave it slightly transparent just in case something drops behind it. I'll be able to see it there. So now I'm not going to work with that anymore. But I'm going to make an estimate of the height of this room. So if I said that a room is probably about 2.5 meters high, I can see that if I triangulate that to there, this is probably about 5 or 6 meters wide. So we're going to make an estimate on this, and maybe that my dimensions don't fully go across, because this is actually 1920 wide, if I remember that, if I'm going to match it exactly. But I'm going to start with a cube, and this cube is going to be tiny compared to that. I can see it on the grid there, and I can see how that works. So I'm going to change the inputs of that shape. So I'm in the channel box editor. I can change these here. You can also do it on the attribute editor if you pick the right node. This one here gives you the same dimensions as the channel box. I just tend to use the channel box at this stage because it seems to be more all in line, the position and the width and height. So the width for this I want to be 1920. Now that may go in the wrong dimension. The height I'm going to say 1080, just because that will match what we've got there. So that's actually going to be too large, and I'm going to work out how I can scale that. And the depth, if I just think it's going to be a brick depth, then I would guess of about 10 centimeters. So that's going to be, if I zoom out, I can see that does match the size of that picture, but it's not actually going to work for me in terms of the wall. So I'm going to just use that as a guide in the background. So I'm going to remember what I thought. So I think 600 by, let's say 2.5. So this is centimeters I'm working in here. So 600 centimeters should be 6 meters by 2.5 meters. And that's working for me there. And that seems to be a good dimension. And I'm right in the middle of that grid. I'm going to bring this slightly sideways. Now, so this is quite large. I'm just going to start by saving the scene. I have already set project. I'm already working with project because I started working with that. Although it seems to have lost it. Ah no, I've gone to set project already, so it's not going to my workspace. But I was working to this Maya create scene demo, and I will be saving in there to make sure everything is relative. So interior scene demo. So I'll save that down there, and that's a fairly good dimension. I am going to try using this snap to grids. So that should, as I move that along, it should allow me to work with the grid, but it's kind of, I'm in such a large scale compared to the grid. I don't think it's really going to make a lot of difference. So sometimes that is really useful. Sometimes you can snap to another piece. You've also got a system called align, so you can align objects together using that. I tend to do this numerically, so I know what size my cube is. It's 250, and I know the center point's in the middle of that, and I will have half 250, 125, to make sure that bottom edge is on the 0 point. Similarly, it's 600 wide. So if I make a kind of squared off room, I could push this back, for example, 300. Rarely are rooms square, so I'm actually going to give that a minus 300 over to there. So that's starting to give me some space around this grid that I can start working with. So again, I'm going to save that, but this time I'm going to go to save scene. I'm going to make sure that I have incremental save turned on. This will create a backup of my work as I go through. So I know this is only a single wall there, but I am going to duplicate this, this shape, and this time I don't get these input values. I only get the same, so it kind of locks them off to the same position. So I'm not going to change this after this point, but I am able to move these around into this square. So that can translate here, 300, and if I duplicate both of these, what I need to do is rotate around the y-axis, and then individually I would change that translation Z and push it back in the other dimension, just to make this 4 walls for my piece. So I'll take that from there, translate Y 300, minus 300. So then I'll just look down on that from the top, and I can see there is a slight overlap here. So looking from the inside, those will be flushed together. On the outside, I've got a slight overlay, but I would work on that slightly differently on the outside. I would put a fascia over the top for the bricks, and I'm not going to worry about that now because it is an interior that I'm building. So just to finish the square, I am making these with cubes, so they are solid objects, which is great, and it will give me some extra functions. So if I do put a window in there, that will work. So I've just saved again. Now I'm going to make a another 2 items to make that work. So I'm going to make another cube, and again I know this is the let's see if I can rename that here. Polycube, P cube, I might name that here floor, and Polycube 1. So I want the 300 width. Give it a height of 6, just because no, I guess 6 is fine. Just up at a level, and a depth of 300. So it is working with this 600s, wasn't it? So it's working with that dimension, and it is just fitting flush in there. So that's the floor, and I will duplicate that and raise that up 250 to make the ceiling. So that's it, essentially my room. My room is a group of cubes, which is a fairly simple thing to make. So now it's making it look like this. This is a challenge, having an object that I'm aiming to emulate with items that I probably haven't even considered, but I have to consider how those would be put together. And the scale. So I've kind of made a scale for this. I've said this is 6 meters by 2.5. So then I can start guessing at how large these are. So I can say probably about 175 for some of these. So now I'm going to have a go at improving on this. So I'm pressing spacebar here. I'm going to change the layout there. So I'm just going to flip back to that normal layout. I'm going to bring up the outliner as a panel in my top left window here in my 4-up view. It's where I can see these cubes. I can see floor 1. I'm going to just double click on that and rename that ceiling. I'm going to capitalize that because it was there. Now I'm going to label each of these walls. So that's in the Z positive plane. So I'm just going to give that a wall Z positive. I can't put a plus or minus sign in there. Now this is an X negative, so it's kind of away from that, the way the X is pointing there. You can name them what you like, but this is just so I get an idea of where they are relative to each other. So this one I would call wall X positive. And finally, wall Z negative. I can also rename that, even though it's locked. Keep that one in there as I go. So next, I can click on all the walls, and I can right click them. I can say assign new material. I think this is a matte kind of paint, so I'm going to give it a Lambert rather than a Blinn. And I am going to take this pipette, and even though it's slightly transparent, I'll take that as my colour, just as a guide to get me up and running with that. What I should really do is select that and take the transparency off, so it's very solid, and then I get the true colour as I go forward. So if I come back to click on this one, I can repeat that, and I should be able to grab that colour, and there, it's becoming slightly more true to the colour it was supposed to be. So that's a start to my realism. And if I look inside, can I look inside? Quite too low. I will start working with bookmarks in a minute. It's probably going to be very dark in there. And I will just try and go through that wall. Yes, so I can see the blue is in there. So the next stage, I will turn on this tab here, which is X-ray, so I can see through while I'm not working with the colours on that. I can do that. And if I click on the floor down here, right click this, assign new material. Again, I'm going to give it a Lambert for now, but it possibly is a shiny texture, but I can change that as I go forward. So I can change Lambert here into Blinn at a later time, and that may give me reflectivity. But what I'm going to do with this one is I'm going to add a file into it that I found earlier. So I've already set up the file node, and I'm going to connect it to hardwood JPEG, which I've downloaded from OpenGameArt. Then what I'll do now is I'll just have a look at that in a wider view. I will turn that on so I can see how that's showing up. Again, I will want to change that slightly, but if I go back to the floor here, I can then add in a bump map, which again is going to be a file, and I can connect that to the normal map, which works with this as well. So it's downloaded from OpenGameArt as well. It's connected to that pack. So there's quite a harsh bump on that, but I'll see what it looks like when I've adjusted the UVs on this part of the geometry. So I'm going to select floor again, click on UVs and UV editor, and I can see there this is what I really want to scale. So I'll click on this move icon there, select all the elements and the scale tool, and I'm going to scale that up so that fits into a small portion of this. I'm only really looking at one aspect of that cube, but I'm going to just center it anyway and see how that comes across. So it's starting to work there. Now what I can do, I'm using the 4-up view, which is great. So I'm going to bring this across here, and I'm going to duplicate my perspective window there. So this perspective window is the same one, but there's some different settings going on there. But what I'm going to do is use the mental rate renderer in this one. It opens up the mental rate settings there, and I get a much more realistic view of what I'm looking at in this scene. So it'll actually give me a preview render of a very high quality that I can start seeing what it's going to look like, which is great. So I can see there is a good detail on that. If I go back to my original image, if I see my original image, I can see that there is some difference in color perhaps on that. Again, I've got the maybe a bit brighter on mine, but I can adjust that in Photoshop afterwards if I wanted to. So that's starting to set this up, and I think the last thing, I just check out the ceiling. The ceiling is plain white, so that's going to be a really easy one for me. Assign new material. I'm going to assume it's matte like the other paint, and I'm going to just bring that up to a white, and ceiling, call that ceiling on the texture there. So now I can really start working with this. I'm going to bring this into this perspective view and come in as close as I can to it, just to kind of get an idea of what it's feeling like inside. So I want to add in the coving around the top. That's my next stage, and just to build up this room to make this work as a proper room. So looking at this coving, I've got this aspect at the top, and I can interpret this in a different way if I want to. I can do a different shape. I can pick out what I want to do with this, but we've also got this lesser kind of rounded shape down at the bottom here as well. So like I say, I'm going to try and put together a coving from a template. So I'm going to create a polygon plane again to give me an example of what I'm going to look at. So I'm going to just raise that up, focus on it, and with that I can then assign a new material, and I have already downloaded an example that I thought I would use for this. So same steps again, linking to a file, and that's not a sort of pure profile, but it will give me enough to work on with this. So I can just work with that, and this is going to do, I may use the, if I highlight that and go to this panel, and I should be able to look at the top view, and if I focus on that element I should be able to see that. Just go into the modeling toolkit and make sure I'm in object mode and F, and lastly get my images on. So pressing spacebar brings that to be full size, full screen, and so with this I'm going to use the EP curve tool. I'm going to draw a shape around the edge of this, and it's not actually showing up, but I can see, I know that it will draw itself out. Anyway, so I'm going to be particularly careful around these corners and just give it a little drag on the other aspects as well, and then we can see how well that's come out and if we need to tweak that or not and make that improve. So I've done that. I'm going to press enter, and now I've created that I should be able to find that in the main scene here. Press F, so it's drawn it down on the origin, and if I move this up to the top of the room and get this to be the right scale, it's under the floorboards at the moment, so I'm going to zoom right out. I think that's quite a tiny item. Bring that right up to near the ceiling there. Another thing I can do if I'm having trouble with accessing areas in this, I can select one of the walls. So I've made it as a full waller as a set. I can create a layer from selected, and I can transparent one or reference one. Probably transparenting is the main option, and then I can actually move through the scene in a much smoother way and be able to see what I'm working on. Now this will need to rotate because it was a flat piece that I worked on. I have just zoomed in on it. Zoom in on it here as well. That's the wall I want the curve. So I'll press Shift and F, and it should come up in each of the windows. So the ceiling's actually there as well. So I'm going to add ceiling to this layer. Double click it, and I'm just going to call that hidden. Now you can change the properties of it. You can turn visibility on and off, but this actually just works for me a lot easier, just having it in these Maya layers. So yeah, I need to make that quite a bit bigger, although it's probably too big, but I will work on the that anyway. And so like I say, I want to rotate it, and I want to rotate it around the blue one, which is the Z axis. I can see that down there, and I'm going to rotate that 90 degrees. Okay, so that's coming together, and then I will probably take that to be the top and rotate it around the green one, which would be Y, 90 degrees as well. No, that's going to should have been minus 90. So once I've got the profile in place, in position on the wall, I'll probably come out slightly just to get an idea of the scale of the building. What I'm going to do is create another EP curve, taking the EP curve tool again, and I'm going to click in the space between it. I'm going to hold down Shift and click again. So holding down Shift allows me to create a straight line with this. And I've made it bigger than this scene because I can adjust this afterwards, but it's easier to manipulate these curves and move them around if I know where they are. Now I can see that there's a slight off centering for the center pivot on that, so I'm going to modify center pivot and bring it onto the center of the object itself and bring it round so it's inside and near the profile that I want to extrude along. Now I'm not sure that it makes a huge difference where it is exactly. You may find it does, but I'm just going to line it up and then select the first curve, which is the profile, shift click in this window here or you can do it in the viewport, but I find it easier here, to select the line it's going to extrude along. And from the modeling menu set, I'm going to go to surfaces, extrude. I will just check that I've reset my settings on this before I do that, and press extrude, and I can see that it's gone forward of my my mark, and it's made it the same length as the item there as well. It's created a new surface in there, and so I can just bring that back, and that will fit into my scene. I will crop that slightly, or scale it, but for the moment when I'm working inside the scene, I'm actually going to leave it, and I'm going to try and just see how that looks with my, my renderer once I've set that up. So hopefully we can see that in Mental Ray, and you can see that that does look quite nice with that coving, and will work when I've got that lighting set up. So now it's a matter of duplicating that, which is a nice process. So I'm going to rotate around the y-axis, that's the up. I rotate that 90 degrees and press, I'm still in that window, type 90 degrees, press enter, click on the item there and press F. It should focus on that item, and I can see it's gone out a completely different way. Again, I'm going to modify center pivot on that so it comes out to the right spot, and just bring that into the room there, and I'll scale it later as I said, but that should make a good corner piece here. And I can also duplicate that again to go on the other side of the room. So I'll just bring that across before I rotate that at -90 or 270. Pressing F, I can just check how it's lined up. It is going into that wall slightly, and that's really my measure of how well that's doing. Finally, duplicate this one and bring that across and do the rotation on here. 270, no, that was on 90, wasn't it? So is that on 90? I'm losing it. 180, trying to spin it around. That should be an easy challenge for me, but once in a while you can get these wrong. Again, it hasn't got the center pivot. I would normally work with modify center pivot on these, just to bring that up to be in the correct position, and I'll just guide that forward so that that works. It's really beginning to start to work, and if I let that render, if I zoom in slightly, you can see that that should come in. Mental Ray is finished. I just need to tilt that up so I can see it. Once we get better settings on this, it will definitely show up really well. Again, zoom in slightly. Doesn't quite like holding on to that. Ah, right. So that started that off. I can see that actually it's not rendering 100% in there, so I will have to bring some lights in. I'm going to save my scene. I'm going to create a point light for the room, which I'll probably use in a different scene. That's gone black now in my render, which is fairly normal, but because I have created a single light, it means that everything else will then disappear. So I'll bring that up to the middle of the room, and hopefully that will allow me to get some proper lights in there. And there you go, you can see that coving working within that scene as it renders. So that's starting to work. I'm starting to get reasonably pleased with that, and that's the edging of my room that I can start working with. So again, I'm going to save that. That's going to be my guide light. If I wanted to have other kinds of lights, I am working with Mental Ray. I can use some environmental light that may come in through a window if I put one in, but I'm not going to do that just yet. And I need to make sure I can sort of frame this in a shot that I think will stay for the stills that I might want to make as I properly render. So I'm going to go in a little bit more, and what I will look for is more of this kind of 4:3, well 16:9 aspect ratio in the scene, and that may need to have I may need to have a look at my render settings on that, but that should make that work. So if I turn off that hidden aspect, that shows up mostly. So this is sort of a little bit flaky on this aspect here, so I'm going to run a full render just so I can get that image to work. Click on the render tab there, it is in mental ray, and that's what I'm working with the render settings at these settings. So I think there may be a slight discrepancy up here over where these are intersecting, so I'll have a look at those. What I'll do, I'll press shift and click both of them and frame them with pressing F on the keyboard, and hopefully I can zoom in on that and just spot where that's going wrong and check into the other edge, see if it's going wrong on that side as well. So I think that that's my main angle over there, I will bring that down to match that best I can. So I'll create a polygon primitive cube. I'm going to type in the dimensions as I go. So I'm going to make the height, I'm saying 180 centimeters for a height, a width of 90, and a depth of, for books, probably not going to be 90. I'm going to say 45. So I'm going to create that as a polygon cube. It's down at the bottom, so the height was 180, so I would bring that up 95 because I want to have a slight gap on the bottom for the feet, and I'm just going to shape that to place that, move that so it goes into the right position. So there's one bookcase over there. I'm actually going to duplicate that. It's not the finished one. I should quite often wait till I finish the second part. But in this case I'm just adding it in. I'm going to create the polygon primitive cube again, and then I had an item that I thought would be 180, potentially 90 high, and the depth of 45, so it kind of matches the depth of the other item, so I'll create that also. Similarly, I'll bring that up 50 to imagine that they've got the same feet. I can see that on the main image at the background there, it's got the same feet. And if I click on that, I've brought it back minus, call that minus 250, shall we? And that can be minus 250. See how that works? It's kind of off the wall slightly, so I probably would work with that in a different way. This one, so 0 on that aspect. Let's try if it was 6, so 300 from the center, minus 45, minus about 6 for the depth of the wall. Can be worked out numerically, or I can do it visually, and I can leave a little bit of room for the skirting board. Minus 270. So minus half of 45 actually would take us to there, and that would place that centerpiece in the middle. So that's not too bad. So I'm going to adjust the other aspects. So that's a chest of drawers, and that's bookshelf 1, and like I say, I'm only going to make one of these, so it's one of these will get deleted in the end anyway. So coming out, I can see the shape there. It's giving me the space that I can work with, and I can put the fascia on there with those items. So I also have a cylinder which would be about bring that up 90, because I'm going to make that 180 high and give it a slightly bigger radius. I'm going to exaggerate the radius of this so it looks a bit larger. I'll push that back into the scene, and that's going to be, I think that's a bit too much. That's going to become this lamp in there, and also I have this profile of this plant pot over there, which I would do in a similar way to the using the profile that I used before. So again, looking at the reference images, I can see with these lights here are downlighters. There's no light coming out the top. So there's an interesting aspect, because I did think originally when I looked at them, oh, I could use a tube, and that would be the easiest thing to do. But it maybe I still do use a tube but have a spotlight in it, or maybe it's again using a cylinder. So I need to add a couple of cylinders to make this item work. Again, in terms of depth, that's probably, in the scale that I'm working to, probably about 30 centimeters radius. So I'll go back to Maya, and so what I could do is duplicate that cylinder, and then I'd know it would be in the same spot, but I'm just going to create another one, but I'm going to note down the position of this. I'm just going to round those numbers up so I remember them. Minus 250 and minus 150. So create a new cylinder. Minus, well, I remember, minus 150 and minus 250. Brings it over to there, and changing the radius to about 30 should give me, there it is there. So it just needs to come up above the floor, which I'm working to there. I'll press F so that becomes my focus, and I'll just check visually that that's on the ground within that. So it gives me the base. Also for the top parts, so if I I'll pick the stem and press F, I should be able to bring in a cylinder or a polygon pipe. So I'll bring in the pipe, and again I'm going to just give it those dimensions, minus 150 by, oops, minus nothing, by minus 250. Brings it over to that aspect, and I'm going to manually lift it up, and again get the radius, but I'm probably going for about 15 on this radius, and 25 on the height. No, radius, so that is that's too high. So radius of 12, height of 30. Makes that really big. Well, it seems really big, but actually I think it's a reasonable size for this. It's got a hole in the top, but I'm going to work with that, and because I'm blocking in still, I can fix that later, but I'll use a spotlight rather than a point light, which is more omnidirectional, and the spotlight will emulate that look anyway. So then it's a matter of really kind of starting to look at the textures again. How are we going to work with that? We can make a handle. Another aspect for that, which we'll do in a type of metal, and this will be a type of metal as well. And so we can sort out the textures for that, which we've looked at briefly, but we could use mental ray textures because we're using the mental ray renderer. For the bookcase here, I would probably go into face mode, select this face, and I would do an extrusion on that. So if I extrude these faces, but I'm going to scale rather than just move them. So I'm going to bring that in there, and then once I've brought in that shape, it won't be quite sideways enough, so I'll just check my reference image. So it's going to be small at the top, but it's quite thick and stylized on the edge. So I'll make that thinner on the top, and then once I've done that, I'll do another extrude, and this time I will just push that back. So I can turn on the X-ray and just push that right back, and I can see how that's fitting in there. So that gives me the basis of my bookshelf. I just need to put the shelf parts in. And similarly, I could just put these on the face, these kind of lines, or use a texture for that, and work out that's probably solid and that's the door. So I just need to do some extrusions for that, and give it a texture and give it the handles as well. What I am missing, which is a really easy one to do, is this picture frame. So I am going to go back and do that while I'm working on this, and I am going to duplicate that from this cube here. So I'll make sure that's in object mode. I'm going to duplicate that, and picture. There's no frame on it actually. That was an interesting point. That's quite a useful thing for me. And so I will take the face and I'll move that together and make. Hopefully I'm working on the picture frame rather than the chest of drawers. Can't always tell. Picture, and I'll bring that up above everything else. So it may be a bit chunky right now, but I will right click that face, select that face. Oh no, in fact I'll just do the whole object first, but I want to make that the canvas, so I'll give it a new material, Lambert, which I'll call canvas, and I may just select that single face to add a picture to, but I'll probably just attach an image to the whole thing. Don't really need to go over that again, but it's a matter of picking a picture, attaching a file to it, and fitting that onto the scene there. Similarly, adding some slats in here, adding some downlights for the spotlights in there. I just create a light, spotlight, and then bring this one up. I do have a light in the scene, so these lights I can scale up just so I can see them a bit better, but I will rotate that in the X dimension to make that go downward pointing. There, it's got the rotation, so I'll put that onto -90, and then place that in situ inside that lamp, and that should give me an idea if that's going to work in that instance or not. I'll just make sure it's near, and then I can start getting closer and having a good look at that and seeing how that works. So I'll zoom in now and just line that up fully inside these and duplicate it to each one. I think this will be very bright once I've done this, but it will be a start that I can adjust. Also, I'd probably make those a bit wider. All of those spotlights, I would probably say I would want to change the cone angle. Let's do them one at a time, but I'll just open them up a bit. It may not shine through if it's within that region, but it may actually give me a good idea of how that's working as well. So if I turn these aspects on and make sure my render is working properly. It turned off when I made my full render of that. So that's coming through, that's not too bad. and you can see how I've got my room set up already. So the rest of it is really texturing and rendering and just adding in the finer details, as is the books. That would start with a cube, and I'll add in some detail on that as well. But that's the basics of really setting up a scene and building it up and getting your textures in. So you're adding the veneer onto these, and the handles is something you can model up quite quickly. But these are very basic shapes that are making a room very quickly.